The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the garden venue. Every detail of Emma's wedding had been meticulously planned, from the perfectly arranged floral arches to the elegant chairs lined up in neat rows. The scent of fresh roses and lavender filled the air, adding a romantic touch to the perfect afternoon. The sound of a string quartet played softly in the background as the guests chatted excitedly, their eyes trained on the aisle. Emma stood in the dressing room, hands trembling ever so slightly as she looked at herself in the full-length mirror. Her wedding gown, a delicate blend of lace and satin, hugged her figure in all the right places. The intricate beading shimmered in the light, catching every glimmer as she turned. Her long veil cascaded down her back, the edges just brushing the floor. She couldn't help but smile as she imagined her fiancé, Daniel, waiting for her at the end of the aisle. The thought of him, standing there with that gentle smile of his, made her heart flutter. As Emma adjusted her bouquet, her mind drifted back to the journey that had brought her here. She and Daniel had been together for 5 wonderful years, meeting in college and quickly becoming inseparable. He had supported her through thick and thin, and now, here they were, on the brink of one of the most important moments of their lives. The wedding had been a dream come true, a celebration of their love and everything they had built together. Outside, the guests began to settle into their seats, and the anticipation in the air was palpable. Emma's heart raced, but there was a sense of calm that washed over her as well. She could hear her father's voice, soft and comforting, as he spoke with the photographer just outside the door. It was almost time. "Emma, are you ready?" Her mother's voice broke through her thoughts, and Emma turned to face her. Her mother stood in the doorway, looking radiant as ever in her own elegant dress. She smiled warmly, her eyes brimming with love and pride. Emma nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I think I am." Her mother walked over, adjusting the veil one last time before stepping back to admire her. "You're beautiful, sweetheart." Daniel is going to be speechless. Just as she said that, the door opened again, and Emma's best friend, Sophie, stepped inside. She was holding a small box in her hands. "Emma, I brought Max to say goodbye before the ceremony. He's been waiting all morning for his moment," Sophie said with a grin. Max, Emma's golden retriever, had been by her side through all the highs and lows of her life. Though not part of the ceremony, he had been included as a guest because of how deeply Emma loved him. He had been sitting in the back, obedient and calm, as always. But now, in the quiet of the dressing room, Emma felt a wave of warmth as she bent down to pet him. Max wagged his tail happily and nuzzled her hand, as if he knew the importance of the moment. "He's been a part of every special memory," Emma whispered to Max, her voice filled with affection. "Today's no different." With a final glance at her reflection, Emma straightened up and took a deep breath. She was ready. The doors to the ceremony hall opened, and her father extended his arm toward her. The moment she had dreamed about for years was finally here. She could feel the eyes of her guests on her as she stepped toward the aisle, her heart beating loudly in her chest. This was it, the start of a new chapter in her life. The moment felt perfect. Nothing could go wrong now. Or so she thought. As the music began to play, Emma took her first step into the aisle, a smile of anticipation forming on her face. But she had no idea what was about to unfold. Max sat quietly near the back of the garden, his golden fur catching the light as he gazed around at the guests who had gathered for the ceremony. To everyone else, he was just another friendly face in the crowd, an adorable dog who had come to see his favorite human get married. But for Emma, Max was much more than that. He had been by her side through every major life moment, a constant presence in her world. From the long walks in the park to late-night study sessions during college, Max had been there, offering unwavering loyalty and love. He wasn't just a pet. He was her confidant, her protector, and her best friend. As the guests settled into their seats and the ceremony began, Max remained calm, his head held high as he watched the proceedings. He was always well-behaved at events like this, content to lie quietly in the background. He had been to parties, family gatherings, and even the occasional quiet dinner, always blending in seamlessly with the crowd. Today, though, something felt different. Max's ears perked up as the sound of soft music began to fill the air. He recognized the familiar notes of the wedding march, the same tune Emma had played for him countless times while practicing in the living room. Max, however, didn't know exactly what was happening, but he knew his role today was important. When Emma had walked into the room earlier, she had greeted him with such affection, and he had sensed the same excitement in her that he always did when something significant was about to happen. But as the procession began, Max's normally calm demeanor shifted. He glanced up toward the entrance where Emma was about to appear. Something in the air felt off to him, a strange energy that made his instincts go into overdrive. As the soft murmur of voices around him grew louder, Max stood up abruptly. His eyes darted toward the aisle, where Emma's figure appeared. She looked stunning, glowing in her bridal gown, but something caught his attention, a small shift in her posture. Her body language was subtle, but Max, with his finely tuned senses, could detect it. The tension in her movements, the way she adjusted her dress slightly as she moved. Max's ears twitched as he watched her walk closer. He knew something wasn't right. The air around him seemed thick, as though something was about to happen, and his protective instincts kicked in. Without warning, Max took a few steps forward, his tail stiffening. He wasn't sure what had prompted the feeling, but he had learned over the years that he should trust his instincts. As Emma walked further down the aisle, the soft music playing in the background, Max began to move faster. He couldn't understand it, but something in his mind told him that Emma needed him. He could sense the tiniest change in her, even if she wasn't aware of it herself. His ears perked up, and before anyone could stop him, Max was moving toward the front, barking loudly to get her attention. The guests turned their heads, startled by the sudden interruption. Emma, frozen in the middle of the aisle, looked down at Max, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. She had never seen Max act like this before. Normally, he would be sitting peacefully or waiting for her commands, but today he was on a mission. With one final loud bark, Max stood directly in front of her, his body tense and his eyes locked onto hers. For a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. The world felt still, and Emma, caught off guard, instinctively stopped walking. She bent down, a wave of uncertainty washing over her. Was something wrong? The guests whispered among themselves, unsure of what to do, but it was clear that Max was trying to communicate something. What was it that had made him act this way? Why was he so determined to stop her? Emma took a deep breath, looking at her dog, and for the first time, she wondered if there was more to this than just a curious interruption. The ceremony had been interrupted in the most unexpected way, but what Emma didn't know yet was that Max wasn't just trying to get her attention. He was trying to protect her. The air around the ceremony grew heavy as Emma stood in the aisle, her heart racing. All eyes were on her, but she couldn't shake the unease that had settled within her. The music continued to play softly, but it felt like it was fading into the background as Max's barking reverberated through the garden. She was still trying to process what was happening when she looked down at him. Max's usual calm demeanor was nowhere to be found. His eyes were wide and intense, focused solely on her, as if trying to convey something urgent. A few guests murmured, some even laughing nervously, thinking it was just a funny distraction, but Emma could feel that it was more than that. Max had never behaved like this before. He was a well-trained dog, always by her side in the most chaotic situations, yet today he was acting as though his instincts had kicked into overdrive. His body was tense, his tail rigid, and the sound of his barking was almost frantic now. "Max, what's wrong?" Emma whispered under her breath, bending down slightly. Her voice trembled as she tried to calm him, but he didn't stop. In fact, he took a few steps closer to her, nudging her gown with his nose. The guests around her began shifting uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that something wasn't quite right. They exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of how to react. Max's barking echoed in the silence that had descended upon the crowd, his eyes never leaving Emma's. It wasn't like him to create such a spectacle, and Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the stares of everyone around her, but it was as if Max and the world were the only things that mattered at that moment. The only thing Emma could focus on was her dog's intense behavior. Max, please, Emma said again, her voice softer this time. She reached down, gently running her fingers through his fur, trying to reassure him that everything was fine. But something wasn't right. She could feel it deep in her gut. Something about Max's frantic energy made her uneasy in a way she couldn't explain. Her thoughts were interrupted when she heard her maid of honor, Sophie, rushing toward her. Emma, let me help, Sophie said quickly, her voice urgent but calm. She kneeled beside Max, trying to coax him away. Come on, Max. You're okay. Let Emma go on with the ceremony. But Max wouldn't budge. His body remained planted firmly in front of Emma, and he continued to bark, louder now, as if insisting that she stop. The whole ceremony had come to a halt as Emma stood there, unsure of what to do next. She felt the tension in the air, and she could see the looks of concern from her parents and friends. It was as though the wedding had turned into a spectacle, all eyes on the bride and her dog. As Sophie tried to lead Max away, Emma noticed something odd. Max wasn't just barking out of excitement or fear. He was pawing at her gown now, his nose nudging the fabric with insistence. It felt like a silent plea, one that Emma couldn't ignore. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Why was he so determined to stop her? And why did she feel like she couldn't move forward, as if something had shifted in the very air around her? She had always trusted Max, and now, in this moment, she was beginning to wonder if there was something more happening than just a dog's random outburst. Emma, Sophie urged, her voice soft but concerned, let's figure out what's going on. Max let out one final urgent bark before he sat down in front of her, still staring at her with those piercing eyes. He wouldn't let her take another step. Emma's mind raced, and for the first time that day, she felt the weight of an unknown anxiety pressing down on her. The ceremony had come to an unexpected stop, but it wasn't until she looked down at Max that she realized something crucial. Max was trying to protect her. The once serene atmosphere of the wedding had shifted dramatically. What had begun as a joyous celebration now felt like an uneasy pause, as if time had frozen for a brief, unnerving moment. Emma stood in the middle of the aisle, her fingers still gently stroking Max's fur, but her heart was hammering in her chest. She could feel the weight of everyone's gaze on her, but her focus remained entirely on Max. Sophie had stopped trying to pull Max away and was now kneeling beside Emma, her brow furrowed in confusion. Emma, what's going on? She whispered. Why won't he move? He's never been like this before. Emma didn't know how to respond. She had never seen Max act with such intensity, and the anxiety that had gripped her heart only deepened. The guests around her shifted in their seats, glancing at each other, unsure of whether they should speak or do something. The music that had once filled the garden seemed distant now, replaced by the unsettling sound of Max's occasional whimpers. Max, what is it? Emma whispered again, her voice trembling. She reached down, her hand brushing over his fur, as though she could comfort him, but it didn't seem to calm him. His eyes remained fixed on her, his body rigid, and his mouth was slightly open, still emitting a soft growl. There was something urgent in the way he was reacting. Sophie stood up and turned to Emma. We need to get him out of the way, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Max wasn't responding to her the way he normally would. He wasn't just being stubborn. He seemed determined, almost desperate. Emma, let me just. But Emma shook her head quickly, silencing Sophie. She didn't want to disrupt the moment any more than it already had, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the overwhelming feeling that something was wrong. She looked around the crowd, but no one seemed to know what to do. Her father's voice was low but steady from behind her. Emma, are you okay? What's going on? I don't know, she murmured. She felt her legs trembling, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if she could move forward. Max was still blocking her path, not in an aggressive way, but with a purpose, something that was beyond her understanding at that moment. Max's eyes shifted, and for a split second, Emma thought she saw something deeper in them, a sense of urgency, as though he was trying to communicate with her. She could feel it now. Her thoughts turned inward, and she realized that the pin in her dress, which she had hardly noticed earlier, was now digging into her side, a sharp discomfort that she hadn't felt before in all the excitement. It was subtle at first, but now it was becoming more noticeable. Her breath caught in her throat. Could this be what Max was sensing? Was it the pin that was causing him to act this way? The pain had been minimal until now, but it had been there, just enough to cause a small, nagging discomfort. But Max, with his heightened senses, must have known something was wrong. He wasn't just reacting to her nervous energy or the chaotic scene around him. He had identified a threat to her well-being. Emma quickly straightened up, trying to ignore the panic that threatened to rise within her. She reached for the edge of her gown and gently moved it aside, revealing the area where the pin had become loose from the corset and was poking into her skin. The realization hit her like a wave. Max had somehow known the pain she hadn't even fully felt yet, and he had tried to warn her. "Max," she whispered, her voice filled with both awe and gratitude. She could feel her anxiety begin to subside as she finally understood what had been happening. Max wasn't just interrupting the ceremony, he had been protecting her. His behavior wasn't random, it was purposeful. He had sensed the discomfort and acted out of love, trying to alert her to the danger she hadn't noticed. Sophie, noticing the change in Emma's expression, knelt down again. "What's going on?" she asked softly. "There's a pin in my dress," Emma said, her voice steady now. "I didn't feel it at first, but Max must have sensed it. He's trying to protect me." Sophie's eyes widened with realization. That's incredible. He knew something was wrong before anyone else. Emma nodded slowly, grateful for Max's intervention. "I don't know what I would have done without him." She glanced down at Max, who was now sitting calmly, his eyes soft but still alert. In that moment, the ceremony felt like it had been stopped for a reason, and Max had saved her from what could have been a painful disaster. As the realization settled in, Emma's hands trembled as she adjusted her dress, carefully shifting it to avoid further contact with the sharp pin that had begun to dig deeper into her side. The discomfort had been subtle at first, a mere whisper of irritation beneath the layers of fabric. But now that she focused on it, she understood the depth of the pain. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was sharp and persistent, threatening to become unbearable if she moved forward without addressing it. Max, sitting calmly in front of her now, had stopped barking, but his eyes never left her. It was as though he knew the danger was past, but he still wasn't satisfied until he was certain she was okay. Emma's heart swelled with gratitude for the dog who had always been by her side, but never more so than at that moment. "Max, you really did save me," Emma whispered, her voice filled with both relief and awe. She reached down to give him a gentle stroke behind the ears, and Max leaned into her touch, nuzzling her hand, as if he knew how much she appreciated him. Sophie, still kneeling beside her, had been watching the scene unfold in silence. She looked at Emma, her expression a mixture of amazement and concern. "I can't believe it," Sophie said softly, almost to herself. He knew. He actually knew. Emma nodded, still reeling from the realization that Max had sensed the pin in her gown before she could even feel its full effect. "I don't know how he did it, but he's always been so attuned to me. He's never let me down before." She glanced at the crowd, who were all still watching, their curiosity piqued by the unexpected turn of events. They had likely never seen anything like this before. A wedding interrupted by a dog, and not just any dog, but one who had somehow sensed the danger that no one else had. Sophie took a deep breath and stood up. "We should get the dress fixed," she said with a sense of urgency, looking toward the aisle where the seamstress was waiting. Emma nodded, her mind still trying to process everything that had happened. She wasn't sure if the ceremony could continue immediately, but she knew one thing for sure. This was something she'd never forget. As Sophie went to fetch the seamstress, Emma remained crouched down in front of Max, her hand resting gently on his fur. It felt like the world had shifted for a moment, and in that space, Max had proven just how much he meant to her. More than a pet, more than a companion, he was her protector, her hero in this very surreal moment. "Thank you," Emma whispered again, pressing her forehead gently against Max's fur. She couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of love for him. There had always been something special about the bond they shared, but this moment truly solidified it. Max had done what no one else could. He had kept her safe in a moment where even she hadn't been aware of the danger. The crowd, sensing that something had been resolved, began to murmur among themselves, their attention slowly shifting away from the disruption. The tension was still palpable, but it seemed like a collective sigh of relief was beginning to sweep through the guests. Emma stood up carefully, feeling a sense of comfort in knowing that the threat was no longer there. She glanced down the aisle toward Daniel, who was still standing at the altar, a concerned expression on his face. It was clear he had been just as puzzled as the rest of the guests when Max had made his dramatic appearance. But now, as Emma caught his gaze, a soft smile formed on her lips. Despite the interruption, she knew this was still her moment, and with Max by her side, it was one she would never forget. Max gave a small wag of his tail as though he, too, understood that things were back on track. The ceremony could proceed. Only now, Emma felt more ready than ever to face the next chapter of her life, knowing that the love and protection of her faithful dog would always be there, no matter what came their way. The guests slowly settled back into their seats as the wedding's unexpected pause began to wear off. Emma stood there, feeling the weight of the moment press against her chest. She was still processing the events that had just unfolded. Max, her golden retriever, had somehow sensed the danger in her dress before she could even fully feel it. The shock was settling in, but the lingering sense of gratitude and love for her dog was overpowering everything else. Sophie had already gone to fetch the seamstress to fix the issue with the dress, but Emma could barely focus on the task at hand. Instead, her attention kept drifting to Max, who had now calmly sat by her side, his tail lazily wagging as though he had just done something as routine as fetching a stick. But this wasn't routine. Max had saved her from what could have been a painful disaster, and Emma couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper to this moment, something that went beyond just the wedding. As Emma glanced down the aisle toward the altar, her eyes met Daniel's. He was still standing there, his brow furrowed in concern, but when their gazes locked, his worried expression softened and a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Emma felt a wave of reassurance wash over her, and though she had been rattled by the interruption, she was reminded of why she was there. She was marrying Daniel, the man she loved, the person who had been her partner through thick and thin. Despite the disruption, she knew that this moment was meant to happen, just as it had been planned. Max seemed to sense Emma's need for a moment of calm. He nudged her hand with his nose, his eyes soft and warm, and Emma felt herself smile. "I don't know what I would do without you, buddy," she whispered, bending down to scratch behind his ears. Max's tail thumped softly in response, a gesture that filled Emma with warmth and comfort. But as Sophie returned with the seamstress, who quickly got to work fixing the pin issue with Emma's gown, Emma's mind kept wandering back to the strange sequence of events. Why had Max acted so urgently? Why had he been so adamant about stopping her from moving forward in the aisle? It was clear now that he had sensed something in her, but was there something more to his behavior? Something beyond the pin? Emma's gaze shifted to the other guests, and she began to wonder if anyone else had noticed how strange the situation had been. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that Max's actions didn't seem to fit the usual pattern of just a nervous dog at a wedding. There was something far more calculated in his urgency, a protective instinct so strong that it had stopped the entire ceremony in its tracks. She felt a sudden wave of uncertainty ripple through her. What if this wasn't just about the pin? What if Max had sensed something more? Something dangerous? The idea was fleeting, but it lingered, unsettling her in a way she couldn't quite explain. Max had always been more than just a pet. He had been her companion through the most challenging moments of her life, from heartbreaks to triumphs. He had stood by her side when no one else could. But now, in this moment, Emma wondered if his attachment to her was deeper than just loyalty. Could he have known something else was wrong? Had he somehow sensed a threat that no one else had? Before Emma could explore this thought further, the seamstress finished adjusting her dress, and Sophie gently lifted Emma's veil, smiling as she checked the fit. "All set," Sophie said with a reassuring nod. "You're good to go. Everything's fixed." Emma took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of questions swirling in her mind. She straightened her posture and glanced at Max one more time, grateful beyond words for his intervention. Whatever had been going on, Max had been right. She had to trust him. He had been her protector, and in that moment, he had once again proved that he would always be here for her. With a final, quiet glance at Daniel, Emma straightened up, ready to walk down the aisle once again. This time, though, she was walking with a renewed sense of awareness, aware that her loyal dog, Max, would always be there to keep her safe, no matter what. The ceremony, though interrupted, would continue. But Emma couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something more was waiting to be revealed, and she wasn't sure if she was prepared for it. The ceremony had almost returned to normal. The seamstress had made the necessary adjustments to Emma's gown, and Max, as if sensing that his job was done, sat contentedly by her side. The guests were beginning to settle back into their seats, their murmurs softening as the music slowly started up again. The tension in the air had dissipated, but for Emma, the questions had only multiplied. She couldn't shake the feeling that Max's interruption wasn't just about a pin. It wasn't just about the discomfort she'd been feeling beneath her dress. No, it felt like there was something more, something he had sensed that no one else had. She glanced down at him again, and the dog's calm gaze met hers. His eyes, usually full of warmth and trust, now carried an intensity she had never seen before, as though he were waiting for her to understand something crucial. Max had always been perceptive. He could sense when she was upset, when she needed comfort, when she was happy. But this felt different. Emma's thoughts began to race, and with every passing second, the question that had started as a fleeting thought now gripped her mind. Was something else happening? Was there a real danger lurking nearby? She glanced at the crowd of guests once again, their faces bright and eager, oblivious to the unease that had gripped her heart. No one else seemed to notice anything unusual, at least no one but Max. Her heart skipped a beat as a realization hit her like a jolt of electricity. Max had known. But how? How had he sensed something that everyone else missed? Her gaze flickered back to Daniel, who stood patiently at the altar. He looked slightly bewildered but understanding, his eyes softening as he watched her. She smiled weakly at him, but her mind was elsewhere. It wasn't the wedding dress or the ceremony that occupied her thoughts anymore. It was the unnerving feeling that there was something lurking in the background, a silent threat, one that only Max had been able to detect. Emma's intuition screamed that she had to figure out what it was before it was too late. Sophie, noticing Emma's sudden shift in focus, stepped closer. "Emma," she asked quietly, her voice filled with concern. "Are you okay? We can still postpone this if you need some time." Emma shook her head quickly. "No," she said softly, though the words felt hollow. "I'm fine, but there's something else going on. I need to figure out what it is." Sophie's brow furrowed, confusion written all over her face. "What do you mean?" Max he was reacting to a pin. That's all. It's over now, right? Emma hesitated, chewing on her lip, her mind spinning. It's not just the pin. There's something else. But she couldn't put it into words. Something deep within her knew that whatever Max had sensed wasn't over. Suddenly, the idea hit her. Her breath caught in her throat. What if it's not about her dress at all? What if the danger Max had sensed was coming from someone else? Someone at the wedding? The thought sent a cold shiver down her spine. Her heart began to race again as her gaze moved over the crowd. She scanned each face. Her parents, friends, distant relatives, all smiling, all oblivious to the threat that Emma now feared. The uncertainty gnawed at her, and she suddenly felt very exposed, as though the entire world had turned against her. She glanced down at Max once more, his alert eyes watching her intently. It was as though he were waiting for her to make the connection, to understand that this wasn't a random act. Something is wrong, Emma thought. Something is not right. Her mind drifted back to earlier in the day, before the ceremony had started. Had anyone noticed anything strange? Any odd behavior or tension among the guests? She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Max's interruption had been a warning, not just to her, but to everyone. Before Emma could form another thought, Sophie spoke again, more urgently this time. "Emma, what's going on? You're scaring me." You're not making sense." Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I think Max might have sensed something. Something dangerous. Not in my dress, but somewhere in the crowd. Something or someone who would hurt us. Sophie's face blanched, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice shaky. Emma nodded slowly, her heart pounding. She couldn't explain it, but deep down she knew her dog wasn't just acting out of nervousness or distraction. Max had seen something, heard something, or perhaps even smelled something. Something that had made him react with such urgency. It was then that Emma noticed the shadow lurking among the crowd, a figure standing just outside the reach of the guest's attention. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the man. It was the same man from her past, the one she had hoped she'd never see again. Emma's breath caught in her throat as her eyes fixed on the figure standing just outside the crowd, half hidden in the shadows. A wave of recognition rushed through her as her mind raced back to a time she had worked so hard to forget. There, in the corner of her vision, was a man she had never wanted to see again. Mark, an ex who had crossed boundaries and left a trail of hurt in his wake. The man who had caused her so much pain, the one who had disappeared from her life without explanation, was now standing right there at her wedding. Max, who had been sitting calmly beside her, suddenly stiffened, his hackles rising as his gaze locked onto Mark. His reaction confirmed Emma's worst fear. Max had known. The dog wasn't just reacting to an unknown threat. He had sensed someone Emma had been trying to protect herself from for years. Max's growl was soft but low, a sound that made Emma's blood run cold. The dog had always been attuned to her emotions, but now his response was more primal. Max was alert, focused, and ready to defend her against whatever danger Mark represented. Emma's mind spun with questions. How had he gotten here? Why now? She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a coincidence. Mark had been out of her life for so long, but here he was, lurking at the edge of her most important day. Sophie, noticing Emma's frozen stance and wide eyes, followed her gaze and her face instantly paled. "Oh no," she whispered, realizing what Emma had seen. "What is he doing here?" Emma didn't answer immediately, her body tense with the weight of the situation. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her thoughts racing. Mark had no place here, no reason to be at her wedding. He had never been invited, and his appearance made her feel exposed, vulnerable. He had a knack for showing up unannounced and causing chaos in her life, and now it seemed he was doing it again. Her hands trembled, and she instinctively stepped closer to Max, who was now standing at attention, his body poised, ready to protect her. She wanted to believe this was just a mistake, that Mark had wandered into the wedding by accident. But deep down she knew better. Mark was not a man who made mistakes. His presence here was no accident. And as the seconds stretched on, the weight of that truth settled heavily on her shoulders. Sophie turned to Emma, her voice urgent. "Do you want me to go get security? We need to handle this, Emma. He shouldn't be here." Emma nodded, but her mind was spinning. "No, not yet," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have to know why he's here. He won't leave until he gets what he wants. And I need to figure out what he wants before anyone else gets hurt." Max, still alert, moved closer to Emma, sensing her distress. She reached down and ran her fingers through his fur, trying to steady her nerves. She knew she had to act fast. She couldn't let Mark ruin this day, but more than that, she couldn't let him hurt anyone else. As the ceremony continued to stall, Emma felt a wave of resolve wash over her. She had survived the worst parts of her past, and she wasn't going to let Mark destroy the most important moment of her life. She had built something beautiful with Daniel, and she wasn't going to let a ghost from her past tear it down. With a deep breath, Emma stood tall, her back straight as she locked eyes with Daniel at the altar. She knew she had to face this. She knew she had to confront Mark, now, before he had the chance to escalate things. But as she prepared to walk toward the edge of the crowd to confront him, Mark made the first move. He stepped forward, his face twisted into a grim smile, and he started walking toward her, his steps slow but deliberate. It was clear that he wasn't just here to ruin her wedding. He had come for something more. Emma's heart pounded as she took a step forward, but Max, sensing her intentions, suddenly lunged forward, positioning himself between her and Mark with a protective growl. The crowd gasped in surprise and Mark froze, his face shifting from confident to uneasy. Max was not only a loyal companion, he was her defender in this moment. Mark's eyes narrowed, and he stopped in his tracks. "Get your dog under control, Emma," he sneered. "This is between you and me." But Emma didn't flinch. She stood her ground, eyes locked on Mark, and with every ounce of strength she had, she spoke. "No, Mark. This ends here. You're not welcome. You're not part of this life anymore. Stay away from me." Max growled again, his body tense, ready to take action if needed, and as Emma stared down Mark, she felt a deep sense of relief begin to fill her. For the first time in years, she was not afraid. She had her loyal dog by her side, and she had the support of the people who truly mattered to her. Mark had no power over her anymore. And with that, Emma knew the past was behind her, and nothing, no one, could take away the happiness she had built.